Hello, everyone. This is my persuasive speech. Here are my three audience members. So, today my speech is on why GMO meats should be taken off the shelves. There are no government laws in which animal treatment or how the animals are raised in the farms, the factory farms. However, there are laws against filming day-to-day operations in factory farms for like secretly filming, so you can't send the PETA people in to see what's going on. And this is part of the reason that the GMO meats are so unknown and why a lot of people are kind of questioning why we even have these. These laws are called AG laws, and it stands for the Agricultural Security Act. So with these laws being in place, people like us can't see day-to-day operations and see how poorly the animals are being treated. And also the reason that their animals are being treated so poorly is not necessarily in beating, but in just the way that they live. There are hundreds and hundreds of animals living per acre, and the reason the meat are classified as basically GMOs because they're all fed um, hormones, steroids, and antibiotics. And the reason they're fed these is because they're in the poor living conditions. They're standing in their feces and urine all day, and the water that they get, if it rains, they drink the water off of the ground, and they're basically just drinking runoff from that. The factory and farming companies are notorious for treating their animals badly. The most famous image that has been shown is the cow on its side being pushed around with a forklift. That's probably the most popular one. And then moving on to that, the ground beef that you can get the cheap ground beef from the store. And when it's like $2 a pound, $3 a pound, you would think that meat just came from one cow. Well, these production factory farm places can produce or slaughter up to 400 cows a day. So that meat is probably from a couple hundred different cows, which is kind of disgusting. And that the reason that meat is so cheap is because it can be from cows that have deficiencies from when they were born. So they could just be baby calves. They could be old dairy cows that just don't produce milk anymore, or they could be cows that have had mental problems and they can't function normally. They just kind of throw everything in there. The slaughterhouses and feedlots with chickens, the chickens are pumped with steroids from the day that they are born, and it causes their muscles to grow and their bones can't keep up with it. So the chickens can only stand for a couple seconds and maybe take 2 or 3 steps and then fall down. And the chickens are the same way. There's hundreds and hundreds of them in a small, dark, they don't see daylight at all, warehouse, and they just kind of grow up. And when they're, I believe it's 78 days that they're alive, and then they're gone. It's really hard to imagine that we eat this every day and the animals are being treated this way. And the reason they're like this is the reason they're GMOs, because it's all factory farming and they want to get their money. When I stopped eating the GMOs, I started feeling a lot better. I started to wake up feeling more energized, and also the natural organic meat tastes a lot better. The texture is more consistent. The flavors there, you can actually taste the meat that you're eating instead of just generic chicken. I guess you'd have to try it before you could understand the difference, but there definitely is a difference, and I enjoyed the difference. The beef industry is worth over $6 billion, sorry, and 85% of this industry is ran by 4 companies: Tyson, Cargill, JBS, and National Beef. All 4 of these companies are on our shelves. We've all consumed them very, very frequently. And on average, each person consumes about 195 pounds of meat a year, and 193 of those pounds of meat are genetically modified. So that's kind of a big factor. All four of these companies have mass production feedlots, slaughterhouse. Like I said before, they can slaughter up to 400 animals a day. And the cattle are first grass-fed the 7 to 9 days after they're born, and then they're pumped with grain on these feedlots. And the companies use these four, not just these four, but all these companies use the grain because it's cheap. And the corn that the grain comes from isn't what the corn was 30 years ago. It's all genetically modified. They used to only be able to grow 20 bushels an acre. Now they're up to 60 bushels an acre just because of the pesticides and everything that they put in it. And it's just genetically modified. After those 7 to 9 days, it's a race from there. And when these cows eat the grain, cows aren't bred to eat grain, they're bred to eat grass. When they eat the grain, it causes their forestomachs to expand. And with this expanding, it can go to their lungs and push on their lungs, so it's hard for them to breathe. And it could also lead to death from basically internal asphyxiation. Throughout my research that I've done, the most appalling thing that stands out to me is the food disembarment law. This law is basically in place for these companies to look back on the people. I'm probably one of them, trying to get people off of their meat. So for changing people's mind and turning them off from eating their profit or their meat and them losing profit, they can sue you and you can face jail time and fines. Oprah Winfrey was sued in the 90s by Texas ranchers, and over 6 years of trials, she eventually won because she was talking bad about E. coli from hamburgers on her show, and they had the ability to sue her from that. So now that we talked about these big corporations and what they do to their animals and how they treat them and why these animals are fed antibiotics, let's talk about some things of why they're able to do this. According to a documentary called Food Inc., in 1972, the FDA conducted 50,000 food inspections. In 2006, the FDA only conducted 9,000. That's kind of a really drastic drop in inspections, along with as big as the quantity is grown in consumption. And another reason is during the Bush administration, the FDA, the former head of the FDA, it was the VP for Food Processors Association. And there was also the chief of staff for the USDA, was the former chief lobbyist for the processing industry in Washington. Both of these kind of they coincide with one another, showing that it's pretty corrupt. They run these processing companies, and then they run the companies that are the ones in charge of inspecting them. So in conclusion, throughout all the research and everything I've done on my personal end for this speech, the animals are treated bad, and the reason they're treated badly is the poor living conditions and also the abuse. And due to the poor living conditions, the GMOs and antibiotics, steroids, everything pumped into them, it's just for profit. They don't care about what we consume, and they also don't care about what the animals consume. Another way to change this, and from what I recommend, is stop eating the GMOs, spend the extra money on grass-fed, and eventually the price will drop if everybody's eating them. And just do your research on what you do for day-to-day eating, living, stuff like that.